Alright, so today we are working on the adjustment layer of our cup still life painting. We're going to be doing this in the Zorn palette continued. And so you can see the paints I have on my palette are titanium white, yellow ochre, cadmium red light, and ivory black. The first thing I'm doing here is I am oiling out my painting, so that means that I've taken the time to make sure that it's nice and dry, and I've then used a small mixture of Gamma, which is my odorless mineral spirits, and my medium that I'm using in this painting, which is Liquin. I'm mixing the two of those together on the palette. It's very clear, so you won't be able to see it very well, but that's what's on my clean brush. And then I'm just dispersing that all over the painting. And then you can see now I'm showing you that I'm making sure that my hands are clean, and I'm taking my clean finger and rubbing that all along the edges of the painting, all over the surface, just to make sure that I'm trying to eliminate as much of the oil as I've applied as possible. The reason that we do this, and if you want to go back to the front of the video and see how it's sunken in a little bit, this is just a way to refresh all of the value information and the color information so that we can see what's actually happening in the painting, and making sure that we can make our decisions based on the true value as opposed to what it looks like when it's sunken in, which will be more matte and lighter in value, particularly in our darks. So after I've oiled out, I'm just going in and I'm starting to add more vibrancy to my color information by glazing. And so this part of the adjustment layer, we're going to be using quite a lot of Liquin, and I'm really focusing on adding in more chroma. That I have my Liquin in the top left corner, and from there I'm just really using that information to help me add more yellow ochre to everything so that the cup really feels very golden. And I'm being strategic about specifically where I'm doing that, and I'm trying to work all over at once. So you can see exactly where I want to add more yellow, and then you'll see that I do that with all of the following colors, that I'm doing that with every color I see. So I'll be doing that with yellow, and trying to make things more golden. I'll be doing it with greens, where I'm mixing yellow ochre and black. I'm going to be doing it with reds, with the cadmium red light straight out of the tube, but then also with a golden orangey color where I'm mixing yellow ochre and cadmium red light. I'm going to do it with purples, which are a mixture of titanium white, ivory black, and a little bit of cad red light. And you'll see that that's the majority of what I'm going to be doing in this beginning, is just adding more chroma, because it got a little bit diluted in my mixtures in the first primary pass. So here you're going to see that I'm changing my opacity, and that the previous glaze underneath my yellow ochre was really very thin, but I'm using a semi-transparent glaze here, which just means that I'm going to add a little bit more pigment so that I can get more of an opaque look in this particular section. And so I decided that it needed that along the edge of the handle. But I'm definitely making decisions all at the same time about value, color, and opacity in terms of what the painting needs all at once. And so it's really important to move very slowly in this adjustment layer, that we've done most of the work in our primary pass, but this is just about having control and working quite slowly and deliberately and as efficiently as possible to make as many changes as we can for the good of the piece, to make it as close to the reference as possible. That, as a reminder, this is an indirect academic painting method for still life painting, and so the goal of this is to try and just emphasize our specific skill set as much as possible in this specific academic way, but that also means that we're trying for representational accuracy as much as possible. So you can see that I'm trying to heighten some of the reds in the corner of the cup on the left side. And so I'm really just trying to keep it as clean as possible, and so I'm deciding to change to a smaller brush. And I'm going to still use quite a lot of medium. That you can see it is quite a transparent amount of information. Now you're going to see me work on the other end of the cup, where I'm working alongside the right edge, as well as some internal variations that I'm making. When I'm working with a subject that's this small, and I have given myself basically the whole day to sit and paint this, a lot of the times I will sort of work all over. I don't necessarily work from left to right or right to left or from dark to light even. A lot of the times I'll work in the area of focus the most. So for me, that's the internal part of the cup here, where I have the most slight variations in terms of the chroma shifting and also just like slight value changes. And so you'll see that I'll sort of work internally there, and I'm trying to find when I've mixed a new color tile. I'm trying to use that in as many places as possible at the same time. But you will find me bouncing around quite a lot, and I just tend to work with what's bothering me the most, or what I see next in terms of what I can be fixing. And so that's the order that I'm going in at the moment. It doesn't have a ton of specificity beyond that. This front edge of this rim of this cup is something you will see me work quite a lot on during this adjustment layer video, and you'll see that I start to try and work semi-transparently, and then I will eventually work opaquely just in this one particular area as a repaint, because in my previous video my rim of my cup, that ellipse, was damaged on the bottom left side where I'm working now, and so I do correct that during this video, and you'll see it does take me quite a lot of tinkering and working with different chroma to just repaint that whole section. I tried to do it really thinly, and it just doesn't end up working, so I will work more opaquely later. And that's all part of an adjustment layer that, in theory, we're just trying to get the painting to be finished, and in my opinion, it's one of the most efficient ways to get it as far as possible in the primary pass, and then come in and do tiny little micro adjustments in the adjustment layer. And that can mean many things in terms of whether it needs glazing, like with more color like we did at the beginning, or just repainting, like you need to just make a total correction in an area with more opaque paint. And then there's also scumbling, which can happen with more like dry brushing techniques, and lighter values being applied on top of previous layers. And so there's kind of a combination of all of those here. Okay, so after a lot of tinkering with the ellipse, I start to go back in and focus in on the main part of it. I do end up doing a little bit more work on the actual front ellipse. It's still not quite right, but a lot of that is just pushing and pulling, like you saw with a little bit of the dark value that's on the internal part of the cup and on the external part of the cup with that really light value that's along the lid or rim edge. And so it's just pushing and pulling those until the shape is quite right and the lips feels like it's not bent in any particular spot. So if you look at that bottom left edge, it's still not quite right, and you can see it's still obviously bothering me because I do go back to that area, but I'm trying to let my eyes refresh in that section for a few minutes, and so I'm going to continue to work on the other areas of the cup and come back to that in a while. When I'm making an adjustment to a light area, specifically one that has a really light highlight, I do like to work a little bit more opaquely. There's definitely something that's really beautiful about paintings that are thin in the shadows and then have some more body to them in the lights. And even you can see that on the outer edge of the cup or the outside of the cup from right on the shadow side to the left side, that it's very thin, and then as it gets thicker it also is getting lighter in value. So from the right side on the shadow side to the left, I go thin to thick in terms of the paint quality, and I'm gonna beef up the left side even a little bit more now so that you really can feel that almost sculptural quality of the light coming out of shadow. And so that's a way that you can sort of play with paint and sculptural elements of it. Some painters take this to really lovely extremes where they're really caking on or using a lot of impasto techniques for the lights. And the only note I'll say about this, sort of to be aware of, in addition to what I've already said, is that you want to make sure that you're doing this strategically in specific areas, because thickness definitely brings focus just as another element. And so you don't necessarily want to do that all over, in my opinion, but a few really strategically placed thick tiles can be really, really effective. So with the Zorn palette, our gray is our cool color in substitution of almost like a blue. And so I started with seeing a few spots of cool value in the bottom left hand that were offsetting some of that really bright yellow ochre. And initially I thought that that was a cool gray by mixing just titanium white and ivory black, but I've added a little bit of cadmium red light to make more of a purple color. And that can add a really nice complementary tile placement sitting right next to each other, of the warm of the yellow right next to this cool gray purple color. So this color is really lovely, and I'm putting it in a lot over on the left hand side, and now you're going to see that I'm going to focus on getting it to blend more seamlessly with the color information that is sitting around it and with the tiles that are sitting around it, that it's a little bit too flat at the moment, and it is very much feeling separate from the rounded shape of the cup and the way that the cup is following light. So I'm taking just a little bit of a darker, almost orange color, and I'm starting to blend some of the edges of that purple by placing the tile next to it and adding a little bit of red and ivory black to that. And so by placing those tiles sitting right next to the other, it's going to help. Also, you can see I don't want too much paint on my brush. I still want this to be semi-transparent. And so I'm allowing a lot of the paint of the underside to do the work for me, of that primary pass to do a lot of the work. And so here you can see I'm just specifically trying to soften the edges of that purple and have it fit a little bit more on the cup itself. When working with this many color transitions at a time, you'll see that I'll be actually switching brushes quite a lot. So I was just working with a purple brush that was going into the reds and oranges, and then I switch a brush for a liner that I had used earlier that was specifically in the yellow ochre family and in the lights in particular. And so you can see I switched to that brush back again. If I wasn't going to do that, I would clean my brush off very well with Gamsol and then wipe it off on a paper towel before switching into this many different color families. But I prefer to use a few different brushes and then just have them well organized on my tabouret beside me. Here I'm doing what I said, where I'm beefing up some of the yellow ochre, and I'm just adding a little bit more body to that, and a little bit more in terms of the thickness, and then also how much of a highlight that is on the left side of the cup that I really wanted to stand out and be one of the things that's helping to bring your eye into the piece in general, as one of the main areas of focus up there on the left hand side. So you just saw me make a mistake, which is really lovely because there's definitely always times in which that's going to happen. And the thing that's important is that I don't panic. I don't want to freak out about the mistake. What I do is that I take a clean brush and I try to mix the value that was there previously because I had just gone too light in that spot. And you can see I actually end up mixing something that's too dark. So I will slowly try and lighten it a little bit at a time and just try and erase that information that I put down. It's at this moment, it is so easy to sort of freak out and put down something that is too light or way too dark. And then if it's wrong again, like I've just put two wrong values down at the same time, you can sort of start to panic and then just put down big paint swatches and try and really like overpower that very quickly. And ultimately that's going to end up causing a bigger mess. This is one small tile that's not right in this entire painting made up of I don't even know how many tiles. And so in this moment, I definitely am telling myself while the video is recording just to take a deep breath and relax and don't freak out, because that 100% is my instinct, is to try and cover it up as quickly as possible. That I just need to fix it ASAP and get it out of the ugly stage or the blemish that is this wrong tile on my painting, and that's sort of the opposite of what I want to do. And you can see that I even move on to a different section just so that I'm not tempted to right away correct that and rush into making a wrong decision. That I am going to go in and add some more green tones to that by mixing my yellow ochre with ivory black, and I will do that here in the next couple of minutes. But for the interim, I'm trying to just allow that to not let me sort of get knocked off my horse in terms of my organization and my slow and deliberate mark making. Here you'll see I'm trying to tighten up some of the drawing, particularly along this left edge of the cup. I feel that I lost a little bit of the curve of that in the primary pass, and so I'm just coming in here quite thinly and just making sure to soften the edge here of the cup while also adding a little bit more dark pigment just along the corner to help it really feel rounded, and that it's dark there in particular because it's turning away from the main light source, which is helping our cup to feel really three-dimensional. I want to make sure that I'm using this semi-transparently and not opaquely, mainly for the reason that I don't want to have too much opaque paint coming on right at the edge and creating a hard line at the edge of our cup. We still want that to feel quite soft, and so by doing this semi-transparently, I don't need to worry about working wet over dry, which is what I'm doing now. The medium is helping me to stay sort of soft, and so that it doesn't feel like it's too sharp an edge. Here you can see I'm starting to add some dark to the outer edge of the cup. I do overshoot this a little bit, and so you'll see that I'm going to kind of put a little extra here. It's still semi-transparent paint, and then I will end up going in and lightening and softening some of that. So you can see I'm adding a little bit of my yellow ochre mixture to that, and I'm going to just bring it along the outer edge and soften that all the way up, just so that it doesn't feel like it's super overwhelmingly dark up in that top lip. I'm really trying to make sure that I use a lot of color variations in this section. I know it looks like it can just be sort of an overall warm, kind of leaning green area that's certainly in the shadows, but you'll see that I'm trying to add different variations to that are more yellow, more red, and so if you're up close you can really see a lot of those subtle variations in color, and so that it just doesn't feel like one flat sheet or section or tile, that even though the overall tile area is meant to be sort of an olivey green, it's really interesting visually to have slight variations of that. So I'm really trying to look at the reference and see, is there an area where it's slightly more red green and slightly more yellow green or more brown green, that what areas can I sort of play around with in that particular section that are really subtle and close together in value, but do have differences in their hue or colors that they are even within that overarching olive green hue. In this corner I can see green and yellow ochre and red and that gray purple color all sitting together in this specific these specific tiles that are reflecting the light at the edge of the cup. And so I'm really trying to capture some of those quite vividly and emphasize all of those little color shifts. So I'm really trying to be slow, and you can see I'm still working with my tiny liner brush and just going in there and making sure that we have all of those slight separations of color. So this is where I'm using titanium white and ivory black to mix just a neutral gray, and that's going to help be my blue in this instant, that everything else is really quite warm. So you can see even on the palette in the middle there, it is quite cool in comparison. And so I'm just going to use this in a couple of spots, but it really does help to bring a lot of emphasis to those particular areas because there's higher contrast. So you can see that I've started using a big floppy watercolor brush to just soften some of these things. I very much have said, and I will say again, that I don't think you should have to use the brush necessarily as a way of making sure that your painting feels blended, but it is a way to add just that extra level of smoothness, and especially for something as smooth and metallic as an object like this, I really think it adds that extra level of importance to the texture that we're trying to recreate here. So here I'm just adding some of those subtle greens in the top left corner that really help to break up some of that really warm tile shape, and so by adding some of these greens, I'm just going to help add a little variation. Here I'll make a note about some of the pressure that I'm using, that depending on the area, sometimes my pressure will be just a feather light touch of my brush, particularly when I'm not using very much paint and it's just a really transparent glaze. I'm not going to be using a ton of pressure, it's just to sort of sit along the top surface. In this case, you can see I'm kind of scrubbing or scumbling in an area, so there's definitely different techniques to applying different bits of paint at different spots within the painting, but it's not very universal. And so pay attention to that while you're watching demos like this, that it can make a difference in terms of what technique I'm trying to do. Here I'm trying to sort of create some of the fall of the way that the light is capturing this object, so I'm trying to be really soft in all of the tiles in that particular area, and so that can call for placing the paint down and then kind of with the remnants that's left on the brush, scrubbing that into the surface just so that it feels really soft as you're moving into the next transition. You can see that my palette is, while it looks a mess, it actually is quite neat in terms of I still have all of my little piles. So I keep my reds together, my blacks together, all of my whites and my yellows, that all of those different colors are kind of in their own perspective piles. And I'm just using those like little areas of slight variation within those same piles. So there is definitely an organization, and you can see that none of those specific piles is really mixing into the other piles to make them muddy. So if my greens and my reds were to mix together, they would actually go quite brown. And so you can see I am keeping those separate, and by keeping my brushes clean this entire time, often by wiping them off with a paper towel and or using Gamsol to wash my brush, it's really helping to make sure that I'm not muddying things, because if I was going to muddy things on the palette, they absolutely would be muddying on the painting. So here I'm making even smaller adjustments, just tiny little things that I'm seeing here and there that I can be fixing. There's not a ton left to be doing on this overall piece, but you can see that I just go through and I'm softening some things in sections and just trying to see any possible things that I could correct that I'm trying to address at the moment. And I do bounce around quite a lot, even more so at the end, just like this could be slightly lighter, or this could be slightly more green, or this could have a tiny more red in it. And so those are the little tiny adjustments I'm making now. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here, and it's just tiny little adjustments that I'm going to continue making. But I guess the main things to think about in an adjustment layer are, to recap really quickly, clean brush organization, palette management, keeping a level head and not trying to go too quickly, and also trying to just add as much subtle variation and really use your control at this stage, that since you're making such micro adjustments so slowly, you really can make a big difference. And yeah, that's all I can really think of, but just making sure that you're sort of following those steps and doing as much as you can in terms of how you can make something an adjustment as opposed to repainting it, and really making the primary pass work as the main part of the painting, and then this is just the adjustment, whether that be transparency or opacity, and sort of adding chroma or adding texture, or whatever you need to be doing, just whatever adjustments you can to make the entire painting better. And as a reminder, this is what our reference looks like, and then this is our final piece here.